Hollywood, California, June 1st, 2008. It is early morning. A maintenance crew is working on the roof of a backlot set at Universal Studios, a replica of a New England street, the kind of false facade that has appeared in hundreds of films. They are using blowtorches. At 3:17 in the morning, something catches. By the time the fire is out, 22 hours later, the music of the 20th century has been reduced to ash. And the people who knew exactly what had been lost decided, as a company, not to tell anyone. They kept that secret for 11 years. To understand what burned that morning, you need to understand what a master recording is. When an artist records a song in a studio, what ends up on tape is not just a song. It is a moment, a specific, unrepeatable convergence of performance and acoustics and technology and time. The air pressure in the room, the way a particular microphone captured a particular voice on a particular afternoon, the warmth of analog tape, the natural compression that happens when sound becomes magnetic signal. A master recording is the original. Every version of that song that has ever been pressed onto vinyl, encoded onto a CD, or streamed from a server is a copy of a copy of a copy, a facsimile, progressively distant from the source. The master is the source. And once a master is gone, it is gone in a way that nothing else in music can be gone. You can reconstruct a song from memory. You can re-record it. But the original moment, the air in the room, the performance as it actually happened, the thing the artist made, that cannot be recovered. Universal Music Group understood this. That is why, over decades of acquisitions and mergers, they had accumulated one of the largest archives of master recordings in history. When UMG absorbed Chess Records, they inherited the masters of Chuck Berry, Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Etta James, the founding documents of American popular music. When they absorbed Decca, they acquired Billie Holiday, Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington. When they absorbed MCA, they absorbed what MCA had absorbed before them. By 2008, Building 6197 on the Universal Studios backlot, a 22,000 square foot warehouse attached to a theme park attraction, housed the irreplaceable sonic heritage of the 20th century. It was not a state-of-the-art preservation facility. It was a warehouse with a theme park next door and a maintenance crew on the roof with blowtorches. Randy Aronson was the Senior Director of Vault Operations at Universal Music Group. He was one of the first people to arrive at the scene on the morning of June 1st. What he saw was a warehouse on fire. Inside those walls were 18-foot metal racks, floor to ceiling, holding tape reels in cardboard boxes. Decades of music, recordings that dated back to the 1940s. Artists who had been dead for 50 years, songs that had never been released. By the time the fire was extinguished, 22 hours after it started, with the walls knocked down by bulldozers and heavy machinery to smother the last flames, what remained were twisted metal racks and tape reels in heaps of rubble and ash. Aronson later estimated that somewhere between 118,000 and 175,000 master tapes had been destroyed. Approximately 500,000 individual songs. Not copies, masters. The original recordings of Buddy Holly, virtually all of his masters. Chuck Berry's Chess Masters, the recordings that created rock and roll. Billie Holiday's entire Decca catalog, most likely lost in total. John Coltrane's masters from his Impulse years. The multi-track recordings of Soundgarden, Tom Petty, Tupac Shakur. And something else, something harder to quantify. Session masters. The tapes that hold the versions that were never chosen. The alternate takes, the outtakes, the instrumental submasters, the studio banter between artists and engineers. The music that existed only there, on those reels, and nowhere else. Versions of songs you have loved your entire life, recorded differently, never heard, now impossible to hear. When Aronson walked away from the rubble that morning, He understood what had happened. Universal Music Group understood what had happened, and they decided not to say so. The day after the fire, Universal released a statement. They said the damage was relatively minor. They said only video and television material had been affected. They said explicitly that no master recordings had been lost. That statement was false. UMG knew it was false when they issued it. In the days that followed, the story appeared briefly in the press as a minor incident, a fire at a studio backlot, some TV and film material damaged, no injuries reported. The music archive was barely mentioned. The artists whose life's work had just turned to ash were not told. Their managers were not told. The musicians who had performed on those recordings, who had built careers on them, who might one day have wanted to release alternate versions or reissues, none of them were told. UMG launched an internal project called Project Phoenix, a quiet 2-year effort to try to replace what had been lost by locating duplicate copies held elsewhere. By the end, they had recovered approximately a fifth of the lost material, in inferior quality, from backup copies that were never meant to be the primary source. The other 4/5 were gone, and the secret held. In June 2019, the New York Times Magazine published an investigation by journalist Jody Rosen. The piece was based largely on interviews with Randy Aronson, the man who had been there that morning, who had seen what burned, and who had carried the knowledge of it for over a decade. The company knew that there would be shock and outrage if people found out the real story, Aronson told Rosen. It's a secret I'm ashamed to have been a part of. Artists began learning what had happened to their music from a newspaper article published 11 years after the fact. Sheryl Crow found out that the original masters of Tuesday Night Music Club, one of the best-selling albums of the 1990s, were gone. I can't understand the cover-up, she said. Soundgarden's estate found that their stereo masters for Bad Motorfinger had been destroyed. Tom Petty's estate filed suit. Tupac Shakur's estate filed suit. 5 plaintiffs launched a class action lawsuit against UMG, alleging the label had never informed artists about the fire and had breached their contracts by failing to protect the masters. Some artists discovered their tapes were safe. Nirvana confirmed their masters survived. The Tragically Hip confirmed theirs had been moved to Canada years earlier. Beck said his losses were minimal. But the losses that were real cannot be undone. The music that existed only on those reels, the alternate takes, the unreleased recordings, the versions no one ever chose, is gone in a way that cannot be fixed by lawsuits or apologies or improved archiving practices. It simply no longer exists. There is something in this story that goes beyond the fire itself. The fire was an accident. A maintenance crew, a torch, a rooftop. These things happen. What was not an accident was the decision that followed. Someone at Universal Music Group, many someones, in a chain of decisions that stretched over 11 years, chose to say nothing, chose to let artists believe their work was safe, chose to manage a public relations problem rather than acknowledge a cultural catastrophe. And what was lost in that choice is not just the music. What was lost is the possibility of knowing what might have been. The Chuck Berry alternate take that might have sounded different. The Billie Holiday recording that might have changed what we understand about her voice in that period. The Buddy Holly song that might have existed and never did. We cannot miss what we never knew existed. That is the particular cruelty of what was lost on June 1st, 2008. Not the music we knew, the music we will never know we lost.